Okay, so for our replication project, we decided to look at.
Wait, that's off air.
It says live.
Now it says live. I'm sorry.
Live.
Okay.
Just go ahead. We'll plan to redo it anyways.
Okay.
We'll just run through it and then we'll do it again either to like if we want to get it over today or just later in the week after we can like edit our graphs and stuff like that anyways, you know.
Okay. All right. So 3, 2, 1. Okay. So for our replication project, we decided to focus on increasing physical activity through increasing our steps during a day. This is going well. So I'm Kelsey. Don't laugh.
It was silly about now. It's fine.
It was so no. I don't know. All right. One more time. All right. So for our replication project, we decided to increase physical activity through increasing our steps in a day. So I'm Kelsey. I'm from New Jersey, and I will be introducing the methods section, more specifically participants and materials, the behavioral definition, data collection, and design.
I'm Ashley Fredericks. I'm from Macomb, Michigan, and I will be talking about the literature review.
Hi, I'm Maya Gregory. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I will be discussing our last 3 criterions as well as the limitations of the project.
Hi, my name is Carly Kreitzberg. I'm from Rochester, New York, and I will be discussing the baseline, the first criterion level, as well as our conclusions.
Hi, I'm Heather Mikowski. I am in Edgewood, Maryland, and I will be discussing inter-observer agreement and treatment integrity.
Why is it just my face?
Everybody click on Heather. Heather needs to click on Heather too.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
No problem. That's the biggest importance of that. You need to click on your name and everybody else needs to click on your name.
Does that look right?
No.
Okay.
But once you click away from, you have to click on your image, but then once you click away from the Google Hangouts, it won't.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
So, going into the literature review. All right. So, every day there are new advancements in technology and the lack of labor-dependent occupations. People are less expected to exert physical energy in their daily lives. Excess body weight is a risk factor for numerous chronic health conditions, and the prevalence of obesity has risen dramatically over the past 30 years. Although multiple factors are linked to excess body weight, physical inactivity stands out as one of the most pressing contributors. Behavioral interventions have often proven helpful in promoting physical activity and increasing physical performance. Studies have demonstrated that the combination of goal setting and individualized feedback can be more effective than goal setting alone. In this replication study, we explore the effectiveness of using reinforcement, self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback in regards to increasing physical activity. Cadence is known as the primary strategy for increasing free living walking speed. 2 behavioral interventions that encourage and maintain physical activity are contingency management and self-management. Contingency management involves an outside agent who monitors behavior and delivers reinforcement. Self-management involves observing and recording one's own behavior and can be used in conjunction with contingency management. Physical activity guidelines are expressed in terms of frequency, duration, intensity, and parameters. Using pedometers and accelerometers offers a new opportunity and objectively monitor the steps taken per day. Walking ranks among the most prevalent and beneficial forms of activity. This replication study was chosen because of the collective desire to promote a positive behavior change in ourselves that was manageably inexpensive due to our everyday roles and responsibilities. For our literature review, we discuss different studies. In accordance to the study, we decide to replicate. I'm sorry. Someone mute their thing. Whoever doesn't have theirs muted. Just Heather, I think. Do you guys hear that?
I do hear it, but mine is muted. It sounds like a lawnmower or a fan.
Yeah. I have mine muted.
Sorry, I muted my sound.
But are we just gonna say like next slide when we want it to go on to the next slide, or what? How are we gonna? Because Heather, you're gonna have to switch the slides if it's on your screen.
Okay, yeah. So I don't know if I'm supposed to do the abstract. So when we really do it, because that was just the abstract. So if not, then I'll just take that out. So I'll just start with the literature review right now, and you can kind of follow along in the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that may be best.
Okay.
All right. So the industrial and technological revolutions have profoundly altered the occupational conditions of modern societies. The National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion suggested that more than 50% of Americans do not get enough physical activity to provide benefits. Though multiple factors are linked to excess body weight, physical inactivity stands out as one of the most pressing contributors. Although most studies focus on structured exercise, which deters individuals from participating. According to Van Warmer, 2004, although structured exercise is beneficial, adherence to such programs is notoriously poor, averaging around 50%. Medical investigations have linked wearing a pedometer to increased activity as well as other health improvements, including weight loss and the like. Bohannon suggested that with an advent of pedometers, it has been economically feasible to accurately quantify the number of walking steps that individuals actually take on a daily basis in a real-world setting. This meta-analysis found that the goal of 10,000 steps per day showed increasing results in lowering blood pressure and increasing exercise capacity in patients with hypertension and weight loss. Van Warmer conducted the experiment to test whether pedometer-aided self-monitoring and brief e-counseling would help overweight adults increase their physical activity. Physical activity was operationally defined as any activity that resulted in a step recorded by the pedometer. Participants included 3 adults who were instructed to reset the pedometer each morning and wear it throughout the day and then record their daily step count at night before bed. The phases of the study included baseline, self-monitoring plus e-counseling, and the follow-up phase. They were not able to see their baseline data. An average was taken after the baseline condition. During the self-monitoring condition, participants recorded their steps each night in an Excel spreadsheet. Next was the self-monitoring with basic counseling component. This involved a step review, weekly goal setting, and praise. Lastly was a follow-up phase. This was conducted 6 months after the study ended and followed the same baseline data. Baseline phases, including reversal, clearly yielded the fewest steps for all participants. For all participants, indicating a functional relation between the self-monitoring and physical activity. Only 1 participant clearly improved during the e-counseling phases. 2 participants saw the sharpest increase in physical activity and achieved the greatest weight loss. Aside from the limitations of the study, it is concluded that pedometers may help bridge the gap between real-world experience and rigors of behavior analytic designs, especially in situations where direct observation can be problematic. Wack, Crossland, and Miltenberger conducted a study to examine the effects of goal setting and performance feedback for increasing running distance among healthy adults. The participants included 5 women from the age range from 18 to 23 years old. These students were all college students. Each session consisted of a run in which distance was recorded using a sport band and sensor. Okay, sorry, Heather, I forgot. After I talk about one thing, there's 2 more slides on the literature review.
Okay.
So you'll just have to go to the next one.
Or Ashley, I think it would be helpful if you just say like next slide so she knows. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. I'll do that when we do it.
Okay.
Each session consisted of a run in which distance was recorded using a sport band and sensor. Participants individually set a short-term goal for each week and a long-term goal to achieve their obtaining baseline data. Weekly meetings were held in person or through video conference and lasted no longer than 20 minutes. These meetings provided the participants with visual and descriptive performance feedback. Granted, if the participants did not meet their goal, they were able to modify their goal once a week in hopes to be able to meet them. The researchers used a multiple baseline design along with an embedded changing criteria design to track the assessment and assess performance. Participants had to have results at or above criterion level for 2 weeks before being able to move on to the next criterion. All 5 participants increased their running distance with a goal setting, and performance feedback. In addition, they were all given a social validity questionnaire. The questionnaire followed that all participants thought the goal setting procedure was motivating and that they plan to continue running even after concluding the study. Hayes and Bandcamp conducted a study to evaluate the effects of intervention package aimed at increasing the physical activity in school-age children during recess. Subjects were recruited from a third grade classroom. A total of 22 sessions were conducted. They occurred 1 to 4 days out of the week during recess. Fitbit accelerometers were put on each participant before their designated recess time. Wherever it was placed one day, it had to be placed the rest. An experimenter recorded the step data on the Fitbit display at the end of each session. They were to participate in unstructured recess activities. During baseline, the participants' band was covered, being unable to see their personal results. During the intervention phase, the Fitbits were unmasked and they were encouraged to check the amount of steps taken throughout their session. They were prompted to report meeting or not meeting the goal. The initial goal was 10% increase from the amount of steps recorded during baseline. The final intervention phase included changing the criterion from 20% to 30% and then to 40%. During reinforcement, subjects were given a tangible award immediately after hitting their goal. If not, they were given praise for encouragement to keep trying. All participants reached goal and showed an increase in steps taken throughout each session. When the intervention was reintroduced, all participants were able to maintain the steps in order to reach criteria. Next slide. Yep. Many students have been conducted in reference to reinforcement, goal setting, and self-monitoring and feedback. One study investigated the beneficial effects of setting goals and health behavior change. Goal setting theory predicts that under certain conditions, setting specific difficult goals leads to higher performance when compared to no goals or vague or non-quantitative goals. It was concluded that, in fact, there was a positive linear relationship between the degree of goal and difficulty of levelty of performance. Reinforcement procedures have shown long-term improvements in behavior. Briggs, Miller, Elena, Briggs, and Cox 2013 focused on finding the effects of reinforcement through parenting practices. Results suggested that there were changes in parent reinforcement and attention behaviors and children's non-compliant behaviors. The more attention maintained reinforcement the child was given for participating in appropriate behaviors, the more they expressed them. Lastly, Kasdan 1974 examined the reactive effect of self-monitoring in 3 different experiments with a total of 250 undergraduates. Experiment 1 evaluated the effect of valence or social desirability of the behavior of self-monitoring. Experiment 3 replicated this, but also evaluated the role of response feedback. Results indicated that self-monitoring was reactive. The valence given to the target response determined a direction of behavior change. Monitoring one's own behavior being monitored by someone else were equally reactive, and providing a performance goal or feedback augmented the reactive effects of self-monitoring. These experiments were cost-friendly, time-friendly, and manageable. Next is Kelsey to talk about the methods.
The slides went away.
I thought
Sorry.
at that point I was stopping screen sharing.
Yep, so hang on.
Okay. I mean, I have it all, but. Oh, so now I need to click off of Heather and on to Ashley.
How do I view it again?
Click view.
Oh, yeah.
You and
Can you guys see it?
There you go. Yep.
Yeah. Now you just got to get to the slide that we were on.
What is our time right now, just out of curiosity?
I don't think we should look at it only because we were messing up in the beginning. And so we got to back it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Can you guys see it?
Yeah, but
you got to back it up to methods. We're on Kelsey's results.
Oh, sorry.
Slide 5. We're on
There we go.
slide 5.
All right. Okay, so for the methods, I'm going to be talking about the participants and the materials. So our study consisted of 5 participants, all of which are students at Ball State University and in 611. They're all female. 80% of them are majoring in applied behavioral analysis, while 20% is in special education. I think that's right. I'd have to double check with you guys, but from what I remembered. Okay.
You guys see me?
No.
No, just oh, okay.
Well, I can see like the slides. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So
Ashley, why don't you mute your thing?
Okay. I'll do that before I open it then. This is
Okay.
good that we're doing this.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So the participants in our replication study were chosen at random. In the beginning of the semester, we just chose a random group to sign up for. So for the study, the intentions were to track how many steps that were taken in a 20-minute session during the day, with the overall goal of increasing steps. In order to track steps, we used an iPhone, which was equipped with the health app, and that already came with the phone, which has a built-in pedometer and automatically counts steps as you start walking. In order to keep track of the predetermined time, we use the clock app, which is also on the iPhone, and set the timer to 20 minutes, and an alarm will go off to indicate that the time was done. Participants would also take a screenshot at the end of the 20 minutes of the health app to keep record of how many steps they had actually taken during that 20-minute session. And also to keep that record, they'd also be able to compare it across the different phases that we would have. So a screenshot would be taken, which is just by holding the home and the lock button together, and that would take the picture. And then also, once a week, each participant would have a second iPhone to calculate IOA data, and they would have the two phones going at the same time. Yeah. Okay, so for our behavior definition, oh yeah, next slide. The behavior we're looking at was to increase the amount of steps by walking as stated earlier. So walking is defined as traveling on foot at each individual standard pace, proceeding forward by steps. One must move by advancing the feet alternately in a continuous forward motion. Non-examples of walking are an elongated gait or a pace faster than what their standard pace would be. As for data collection, data collection was taken in a baseline and an intervention phases. For baseline, the initial stage of the study, for baseline, the initial stage of the study, the data was collected Monday through Friday, and it was any 20 minutes in those days. A baseline occurred through self-monitoring to ensure that the iPhones were set at 0 to begin, and any other record of any previous steps during that day were deleted. That way it was a clean slate.
Wait, I actually gotta go to the next slide.
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, once the data said 0, the 20, I feel like I'm messing this up, but okay. So once the timer said 0, the clock app, oh, called blah, blah, holy hell. So once oh my God. So once the health app read 0, they would start the timer for the 20 minutes at whatever time they chose. The iPhone was placed in the participant's right pocket, and the number of steps being recorded during the baseline was unknown. When the timer would sound, the participant would then screenshot the steps that were on their phone, again, to keep record of it. In order for baseline to be considered complete, it was recorded until stability was reflected in the data or there was a upward trend, and baseline was recorded on a line graph created through Excel. As for the intervention phase of the study, the data collection method was the same as baseline. However, during the 20-minute sessions, participants would periodically look at their phone to ensure that they were on track to meeting the predetermined steps that, oh my God, thank God we're doing this now. Participants would periodically look at steps during the 20 minutes to ensure that they were meeting the intervention's predetermined amount that they had to meet. So participants also set a timer on their phone for every 5 minutes as a reminder to check their phone to see how many steps they've accumulated. For not meeting it, participants would just basically say, try again next time to themselves as a vote of encouragement. Also, prior to the session's beginning, the participants would calculate their own personal goals by taking the baseline average and adding 10% to what that was. So that would be criterion 1. And it would continue for 3 more criterions for 20%, 30%, and 40% to see the increase. For each percentage that was met, the participant was reinforced with time in a preferred activity. As for design of the study, the original study used a reversal design, which due to the time constraints that we had for this project, it wasn't conducive to following that. So we did change it to a change of criterion design. So basically during the intervention phase, we just changed the phases once the data reflected stability. And so Carly will now talk to you about baseline treatment phases.
Okay, so the baseline data were collected during a participant's recess time. It was really just a 20-minute period throughout the person's day where they could move freely to accumulate these steps. Averages ranged from 268 steps to 958 steps during that 20-minute interval. And the baseline average across all 5 participants was 634 steps. As you can see from the graph, some baseline sessions were a bit lower, some were a bit higher, and that just depends on the person's physical activity level. Then due to their baseline level, the criterion goals would increase steadily. So based on your baseline, your final 40% increase varied from 375 steps all the way up to 1,393. Next slide. That's Maya. Sorry. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so to continue with the criterion data, as Carly had mentioned, each participant had different times of the day that they utilized a 20-minute segue to take the data. What we did here was just talked about how in each graph that you'll see following this, we had an average of how many times it took before each person had an increase. There was an average of 2 data points before each person was able to hit their 20% increase. Real calculation was 1.8. To hit the 30% increase, it was about 2 data points again before the 30% increase was hit, which was on real time 2.25. And then by the 40%, each person on average had only took about 1 data point before the 40% increase came about. And just from seeing how each of the graphs were, it showed that on average, each participant gradually increased their steps overall. And even through different things that were going on and this determining factors that determine how many steps were taken, they did attempt to increase their steps outside of those outside factors. And the next slide. These are just the results that talk about each person's.
Oh, am I doing results?
I have no clue.
I think I'm doing the results.
I can split that up with you if you want.
I don't mind doing it because I made the table, so I'll just talk about it.
Gotcha.
Because when I was making it, I was kind of thinking what I was going to do. So our first participant is Kelsey, and of all the participants, she had the lowest baseline. As you can see from the first criterion, she struggled to meet the goal in the first 2 sessions, but was able to achieve the criterion level in the 3rd and 4th data point within that session. So to reach the next criterion level within our project, you needed to successfully reach the goal 2 times before you can move forward. The second criterion, she was able to meet that goal as well as the 3rd and the 4th. And although by the 4th session, she had a lower average than the previous criterion level, she was still able to achieve her goal and have a higher data average than the baseline in all 4 criterion levels. Next slide. Next, we see Ashley, and Ashley was the most active of the group. She had the highest baseline, and to continue such an increase, she had to maintain a pretty high level of steps. But as you can see by the graph, her data average steadily increased, and she was able to achieve that goal and move on to the next criterion level in every session. There were just a few points where she did not meet the criterion level, but with continued monitoring, she was able to meet that level, move on to the next criterion. And by her final phase, she exceeded her criterion level for both sessions. Next is Maya's, and Maya had a more variable data, but overall she was able to achieve the criterion levels many times throughout the activity. In criterion 1 and 2, she met those goals without any hesitation and was able to move on to the next criterion level. Criterion 3 saw a bit of a dip in goal setting, but once she achieved in the 4th and 5th session of that criterion level, she was able to move on to the next session. And as you can see in criterion 4, her average greatly increased and overall increased her baseline session from 295 steps all the way up to 714 on average. Next is my goal. So I had a moderate baseline. It was right in the middle from the range of all 5. So with an average of 744 steps, I had to work a bit harder to achieve that final criterion level of 1,247 steps. I was able to meet my first criterion level without hesitation in the first session, but when it came to criterion 2, I found that I had to work a bit harder to meet those criterion goals before I could move on to the next session. Criterion 3 and criterion 4, I was able to meet my goal for every session. Next slide. Heather, we had some health issues, so she was not able to complete the study successfully, but she had a higher baseline average too. She averaged 905 steps in her baseline session, bringing her 10% increase to a modest goal of 774 steps. But unfortunately, we couldn't see how this activity were to carry out with Heather since she was unable to complete the session. Next slide. So that would be Heather, you're next. Yeah.
The next one after. Yeah.
There we go. That one. The inter-observer agreement for the original study had a second observer approximately 2 to 3 days per week during the entirety of the study. Due to the restrictions of our study and not being able to incorporate another person outside of our group, be it a friend or family member, we needed to find another alternative for a second observer. We decided to use a second device since we were already using an iPhone device, that we would use an additional Apple device with the same application of the health app that is available on the Apple devices. Each participant chose one day out of the week, and each of those days they would use blah, blah, blah. They would use both devices and keep track of their inter-observer agreement, basically their steps for each of the devices. The device with the lower number of steps would be divided by the device with the higher number of steps and then multiplied by 100 to get the inter-observer agreement for that day. What you see here on the slide are the averages for each day of the week during our entire study. Monday's average was 98.5%, Tuesday's 96.5%, Wednesday was 99%, Thursday 78%, and Friday was 85.2%. With a total average, we added those together and divided by the 5 days, and a total average of 91.44% for inter-observer agreement. 91.4 is a deviation of about 8.5%. This is an acceptable inter-observer agreement because steps is a high frequency behavior that is difficult to get an exact amount. So within that 90% range would be acceptable. Our focus was to increase the activity level of each participant. So even within 90%, inter-observer agreement still is showing an overall increase in activity, which is acceptable and appropriate. For treatment integrity, we focused on 5 criteria: walking on foot, proceeding forward, having the required materials available, using a timer, and being independent of others, meaning that the participant was walking on their own. We kept track of this for each day during the week and basically every session that we did. If there was any modification from the standard accepted criteria, that was listed as well and subtracted from the total of the required criteria. All of the criteria for treatment integrity and the numbers were gathered together from each participant and then averaged out to come up with a total treatment integrity percentage. What we found overall in our study was that the first 3 criteria had an overall of 100% for all participants in all sessions, meaning that every participant was walking on foot, proceeding forward, and had the required materials at all times. However, using a timer and walking independently of others scored slightly lower. What this tells us is that in the future, if somebody is replicating this study, they may want to keep a timer separate from the same device that they are using to keep track of the steps. Trying to remember to zero out your step count and set your timer at the same time on the same device could be a little bit much for a participant to keep track of. As far as walking independently of others, that is something that you'd want to keep a close monitor of when you are replicating this study, because walking with someone will increase or decrease the number of steps, because a person will naturally try to either keep up with or slow down to stay in line with the other person that they're walking with. So that could greatly influence the numbers. Our overall treatment integrity was 95.44%. which seems like an acceptable level. However, as we stated, walking with another person can greatly influence the data in a positive or negative way. So this should be considered when replicating the study.
So, as far as the limitations for our project is concerned, each participant experienced different limitations throughout the execution of the study. And we believe that with each limitation, that it may have had some effect to some of the data that was achieved. Taking into consideration that each person has different jobs, different schedules throughout the day, during the week, and there's some jobs are more sedentary than others, that could definitely affect the data. And also we take into consideration, as we said before, any outside factors of whether someone may have gotten sick or someone may have had one thing to do on one day that they didn't have to do on another day. So there were many different limitations. For me, my job is very sedentary. I have an office-based job, which doesn't require me to do too much walking. So being out of my seat at different times during the day, depending on if I'm walking to a meeting or what time I go to lunch or whatever it is that I did, it was a little bit harder for me. And I had to become a little more purposeful in making sure that I did get some increase in my steps when I saw that there was different ranges of decreases and increases throughout the day. And so that for me made it a little bit harder to reach my steps. Kelsey talked about the Hawthorne effect, which means that it's basically an adjustment to the behavior when knowing that there's an outside factor that she's actually being recorded. And so knowing that she was actually doing this study may have also altered how many steps that she took, whether it's an increase or decrease. Also, her job requires her to be out working a little more hands-on. And so her phone may not have always been on her, which also could have altered her calculations. Carly's steps were taken while she was walking her dog. And so with that, when it's not just based on one person's amount of walking. She's also basing it upon how much her dog may be walking at that time. And there could be stop and start throughout the timing, throughout the 20-minute period. That can also determine how many steps that she's taking during that time. During, I believe it was her last 2 weeks or last 2 days. I forgot which one was it.
Last two criterion levels.
Last two criterion. Okay, got it. So during her last two criterion levels, she decided that she was no longer going to utilize her dog or walk her dog while doing her steps. So she would do walks and runs during that time. And Ashley, as Kelsey said, also experienced the Hawthorne effect when it came down to collecting data for our project.
Next slide.
Yeah, next slide.
So for our conclusions, although not all participants were able to complete the study, we did know that self-monitoring helped each participant increase their average step count from baseline at some point through the replication. So there was a data point or several that was higher than their baseline average. 4 out of 5 participants saw an increase in their average number of steps after the very first phase, meaning that once the treatment was implemented, there was an increase in step count. And 3 out of the 5 participants saw an increase from baseline average in every single phase, meaning criterion 1 was higher than baseline, criterion 2 was higher than that, 3 even higher, and 4th being the highest step average. So all participants who successfully completed the replication were able to meet their goals for 2 sessions per criterion level. It was a requirement that you meet 2 consecutive sessions before you were allowed to move to the next criterion level, and all the participants who were able to complete the replication did move through all 4 levels. All participants who successfully completed the replication exceeded their highest criterion level for at least half of their sessions in the final phase. So at the 40% level, when we're expected to take our highest number of steps, all of the participants met their highest goal for at least 2 data points in that phase. And 2 participants exceeded their highest criterion levels during each session of the final phase, showing that after the self-monitoring intervention was implemented throughout the entire month, by the time we reached the highest criterion level, 2 participants, which I believe were me and Ashley, were able to exceed their highest criterion level for every single phase. So I feel like I need to just put one more sentence to wrap it up. I'm not really sure how
Question, and I may have missed this because there was a lot of stuff. It gets a little long-winded. Did we talk about, and I think this may be Kelsey, did you talk about like what each